Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always. What have you got for us this time?
Well, this one's been stuck in my head for weeks now. It all starts in Jericho, New York, back in '99. Picture this.
Okay.
A homeowner's getting his house ready to sell.
Normal enough, right?
Right, standard procedure. But here's the twist. This guy finds a 55-gallon drum hidden away in his crawl space.
That's not your typical home improvement project.
Not at all. And we're not talking about a lightweight container either. This thing weighed over 350 pounds.
350 pounds. Okay, now I'm intrigued. What was inside?
Let's just say this house sale took a very, very dark turn.
Oh, this is going to be good. You know, it's funny how an ordinary house like that can suddenly become a window into the past.
Right.
Like history's not always buried deep, you know?
Mhm.
Sometimes it's right there under the floorboards just waiting.
And in this case, what they found was truly chilling. We're not talking old photographs or anything like that. Inside that barrel,
Yeah.
submerged in this weird green goo, they found human remains. A hand, a shoe, the smell. It was a gruesome scene.
That's awful. So who was she?
Well, that's where the mystery begins. The victim was a petite woman, maybe in her early 20s. Long black hair.
Okay.
And one detail immediately jumped out at investigators. A distinctive gold bridge in her mouth.
Interesting. That kind of dental work wasn't too common here back then. Makes you think maybe she was an immigrant.
Exactly. And remember, this is 1999.
Right.
DNA databases were still pretty new, and tracing international records, well, let's just say it wasn't as easy as it is now.
Oh, absolutely. So many roadblocks back then.
Identifying this woman was going to be a huge challenge. And her story, unfortunately, gets even more tragic.
What do you mean?
The autopsy revealed she was a victim of blunt force trauma, probably a hammer. And to make matters worse,
Uh-oh.
she was 8 or 9 months pregnant at the time of her death.
That's just horrific. Talk about a complex case. So where did investigators even start?
Right. It's not like they had a suspect's name just handed to them. They had to piece it all together, and they started with the most obvious clue.
I'm listening.
The barrel itself. It had these letters stamped on the side, GAF. Turned out, those markings led them to a chemical company over in New Jersey.
Ah, good old-fashioned detective work. No Google searches back then.
Nope. Pick up the phone, hit the pavement. It's incredible how much investigative work has changed, even in just a couple of decades.
I know. It's crazy to think about. So they head over to GAF with samples of that green goo and some tiny plastic pellets they found inside.
Okay, so what's the deal with the goo and the pellets? Some kind of secret formula.
Not quite a secret formula, but just as telling in its own way. You see, those pellets were polyethylene. Pretty common back then, used to make all sorts of plastic things.
Right.
But the goo, that was the key. It was this unique dye called halogen green, used specifically for those plastic flyer bases. Remember those?
Plastic flowers. Okay, this is starting to sound less like a mob hit and more like, I don't know, a weird art project gone wrong.
We'll hold on to that thought because it gets even more interesting. GAF told the detectives they only had one customer buying halogen green in bulk. Melrose Plastics.
Melrose Plastics. Okay, got it. But what about the victim? Was there anything in the barrel that could tell them who she was?
There was, but it was in rough shape. Imagine a soggy, goo-covered address book. Not exactly helpful. Right.
Not ideal.
But investigators had a trick up their sleeve. A video spectral comparator.
What? That sounds like something straight out of a spy movie.
It kind of is. Think of it like a super-powered camera that can see things we can't. You know, reveal hidden details, faded ink, that sort of thing.
So like a magic lens for old documents.
Exactly. And in this case, it helped them uncover a partial resident alien number from that damaged address book.
A resident alien number, wasn't that something they used to assign to immigrants?
Right, like a social security number specifically for immigrants legally residing in the U.S. But in '99, tracing that number was a long and tedious process.
I bet. Lots of paperwork, right?
Mountains of it. But it was their best shot at identifying the victim.
So they've got this partial number, this unique dye, and Melrose Plastics. Did any of those pieces start to fit together?
They did. And it took the investigation in a whole new direction. See, Melrose Plastics was owned by a man named Howard Elkins.
Okay.
And guess what? He had owned that same house in Jericho back in '72. The same house where they found the barrel decades later.
No way. That can't be a coincidence.
That certainly raised some eyebrows. This guy, Howard Elkins, owned the company that supplied the unique dye found in the barrel. And he used to live in the very house where the barrel was discovered.
Talk about a plot twist.
It was time to start digging into Howard Elkins' past. They tracked down his former business partner, a guy named Melvin Gantman,
Hoping he might have some answers.
Exactly. And Gantman's memory was a gold mine. He confirmed that the barrel was the top they used at Melrose Plastics, and he recognized the dye in those pellets right away.
He must have been a huge help.
Oh, he was. Even pointed out that a plastic flower stem found in the barrel was identical to the ones they used to manufacture.
Wow.
But what really got the detectives thinking was Gantman's memory of Elkins having an affair with a Hispanic employee.
Oh.
And you'll never guess.
What?
She had a distinctive gold bridge in her teeth.
No way. It all starts to line up.
It does, doesn't it? It seems like they were zeroing in on their suspect.
I bet.
They were getting closer. But they needed more before they could confront Elkins. And you won't believe what happened next.
This case is full of surprises, isn't it?
It's just getting started. Get ready for another wild turn.
So they've got Howard Elkins in their sights, former owner of Melrose Plastics, the Jericho house, and it sounds like quite the ladies' man.
Yeah, things weren't looking too good for Mr. Elkins. The detectives decided it was time for a little face-to-face.
Right.
He'd retired to Boca Raton, Florida, so they packed their bags and headed down to the Sunshine State.
They show up on his doorstep, ready to ask him some tough questions about the barrel, the dye, the missing woman. How did he react?
You'd think he'd be nervous, right? But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Elkins was totally nonchalant. Almost like he didn't care. Claimed he couldn't remember anything about the barrel, the dye, any of it.
Seriously.
It was like he was trying to dismiss the whole thing like a minor inconvenience from his past.
Playing the amnesia card, huh? Did the detectives buy it?
Not a chance. They pressed him about the affair Gantman had mentioned, and while Elkins admitted to it,
Okay.
he downplayed it like it was nothing. Just a fling that ended, he said. Claimed the woman just left. He didn't even know she was pregnant.
He didn't even remember her name. That's cold.
It was. But the detectives weren't giving up. They let Elkins know they'd be back with a warrant, and they made it clear they suspected he was involved.
I bet that got his attention.
Yeah, it was like they could see right through his act. Now, who knows what was going through his mind at that moment?
Yeah.
But the next morning, Howard Elkins disappeared, vanished without a trace.
Oh, wow.
His wife reported him missing. There was a whole search.
It's like he just vanished into thin air.
It was a dramatic turn of events. Sadly, there wouldn't be any big chase or anything like that.
So what happened?
They found him dead, inside a neighbor's car. He'd taken his own life.
Suicide. It almost sounds like an admission of guilt, like he couldn't live with the weight of what he'd done.
It's hard to say for sure, but it certainly seems that way. And just to be certain, they ran DNA tests. Confirmed Howard Elkins was the father of the unborn child.
So, case closed. They got their guy. They got the evidence. Elkins was responsible for this horrible crime.
Legally speaking, yes, the case was closed. But there was still a big piece missing. They didn't know who the victim was.
Right. They knew she was probably from South America, but that was it.
They needed a name, a story, a life to attach to this tragedy. Remember that damaged address book we talked about? The one with the resident alien number?
Yeah.
It took time, but they managed to trace it. 8 days after finding the barrel, they got a match.
What?
It belonged to Reina Angelica Mariquin, an immigrant from El Salvador who'd come to the U.S. back in '66.
Reina Angelica American. Finally, they had a name.
But her story, how she ended up entangled with Howard Elkins, that was still a mystery. But that address book, it was more than just names and numbers,
Right. A glimpse into her life.
They were able to pull more information from those waterlogged pages. Addresses, phone numbers, even some notes scribbled in the margins.
Amazing what they can do with forensic science.
It is. And one phone number in particular, it stood out. It was over 30 years old, but they decided to try it anyway.
You never know, right?
And someone answered.
Wow. So who was it?
Her name was Kathy Andrade. And incredibly, she was still living at the address listed in that old book. She had been Reina's close friend back in the late 60s.
What are the odds? It's like fate led them to the one person who could tell them about Reina.
It really was. Kathy's memories, although sad, helped them paint a picture of Reina. Her dreams, her hopes, her fears.
What did she tell them?
She confirmed that Reina had worked at Melrose Plastics, making those plastic flowers. That's where she met Elkins. And she'd confided in Kathy about the pregnancy and about her fears. She confronted Elkins' wife about the affair. Can you imagine the situation she was in? Young, alone in a new country, pregnant, and caught up in all of this.
Must have been terrifying.
Kathy said Reina vanished soon after that confrontation. She was heartbroken, worried, sick. For over 30 years, she wondered what happened to her friend.
It's easy to forget that behind every cold case, there are real people whose lives were shattered.
Absolutely. And for Reina's family, the pain was unimaginable. A journalist managed to find Reina's mother in El Salvador. She said they used to talk on the phone regularly, and then suddenly, nothing.
Decades of silence, of not
And
knowing.
it gets even more chilling. Reina's mother said she used to have these vivid dreams of her daughter trapped inside a barrel.
Oh, wow. It's like a mother's intuition, you know? Did she ever get any closure?
They returned Reina's remains to El Salvador so her family could finally lay her to rest. But tragically, her mother passed away just a month later.
That's so sad. This case is full of twists and turns, but it's also a testament to the dedication of those investigators, the power of forensics, and the strength of human connection.
And it raises so many questions about the immigrant experience, domestic violence, the nature of justice.
One thing that still bothers me, remember that locket they found in the barrel? The one that said, "To Patrice, love Uncle Phil?" It's like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit anywhere.
I know, it's strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
They never figured out where it came from or what it meant. Couldn't connect it to Reina or Elkins.
It's like a little whisper from another mystery hidden inside this one.
Even in cases that seem resolved, there are always loose ends, unanswered questions that linger.
It makes you wonder, who was Patrice? What was the story behind that locket? Maybe it was from a completely different life, somehow tangled up in this tragedy.
It's definitely something to think about. I think we need a moment to let all of this sink in.
Yeah, I agree. We'll be back in a moment to wrap up this deep dive into the lady in the barrel. It's wild to think about that locket just floating around out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to go on a quest to find out who Patrice is.
Right. It's like a little breadcrumb trail leading to who knows where.
But even with that loose end, Reina's story really sticks with you. It shows that sometimes finding justice isn't about wrapping everything up in a neat little bow.
It's about getting to the truth, honoring the victims, and understanding how complicated life and people really are.
Yeah. And in Reina's case, there's definitely this feeling of unfinished business. Howard Elkins took his own life before facing a trial. It almost feels like he escaped accountability in a way.
In a legal sense, maybe? But he still had to face his own conscience, the weight of his actions.
That's true. I mean, a trial and a potential sentence are one thing, but facing yourself, knowing what you've done, that's a different kind of judgment.
Definitely. And while we can't really know what was going through Elkin's mind or why he chose to end his life, we can't ignore the impact his actions had on everyone else.
Especially Reina's family. Her mother lived with that uncertainty and grief for decades. It's hard to even imagine.
And Kathy, Raina's friend, she carried that weight for over 30 years. Finding out what happened must have been both a relief and absolutely heartbreaking.
It's amazing that she still had such strong memories of Reina after all that time. She really helped bring Reina's story to life.
It speaks to the power of their friendship. This whole case makes you think, could things have been different? Was there any way to stop this from happening?
It's a question that comes up a lot with these kinds of stories. Reina's case really highlights how important awareness and support are, especially for immigrant communities.
Absolutely. Language barriers, cultural differences, fear of deportation, all those things can make it so hard for people to ask for help.
Like invisible walls, keeping them trapped and silent. We need to break down those walls, create safe spaces for people to speak out.
And make sure everyone, no matter their background or immigration status, has access to support and protection.
We need to talk about domestic violence more openly, recognize the warning signs, understand that it can happen to anyone.
Raina's story is a powerful reminder that silence can be deadly. We have to listen, believe, and speak up for those who can't speak for themselves.
It's a tough conversation to have, but it's so important. By shining a light on these issues, maybe we can create a safer world for everyone.
Raina Angelica Mariquin's story is a tragedy, but it's also a story of resilience, of a young woman who had dreams for a better life. Even though she's gone, her story lives on.
It does. In the hearts of those who loved her and in the fight for justice and equality, this deep dive has taken us to some dark places, but it's also a reminder that even in the face of terrible loss, there's hope, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of truth.
Thank you all for joining us as we explore this case. We hope Raina's story stays with you and encourages you to think, to talk, and to make a difference.
That's it for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay compassionate.